evening and welcome to the Missoula Public Library. I'm Dennis Bragg. It's time for another session of Wednesdays with the Mayor. We're here with Mayor Jordan Hess, and we want to thank off the top, because sometimes I forget to do that, we want to thank our great guests, hosts here at the Missoula Public Library. Of course, the team, Scott and Ron and everybody from MCAT, who do such a good job of keeping us on camera and following me around through the whole thing. And we want to thank all of our audience who showed up tonight. Mayor, pleased to see you on this pleasant, spring evening, I guess, here in western Montana. Yeah, it is. Starting to sort of trying to turn the corner a little bit. We're going to talk about something tonight that I think is really interesting. For the past several years, there have been many discussions about what to do with the traffic in this kind of the heart of the city, Higgins. That whole Higgins Corridor, as we call it. And there's been a lot of different proposals. Things have kind of accelerating in recent months and weeks, and I thought tonight we could spend a little bit of time talking about kind of break down some of the details on that. How's that sound? So let's start out a little bit. Let's talk about problems first. What are some of the things that we see in Higgins Avenue that are sort of precipitating this need for change?
Well, a lot of our downtown area was really built in this kind of post-World War II era when we were doing a lot of one-way streets, when we were focusing on evacuating downtowns in the event of some kind of a crisis. And we have, over the last number of decades, transitioned the way that we plan our street network in the United States. So one of the vestiges of this system is a safety problem. Higgins Avenue has a crash cluster that is higher than what we see in the rest of the community. And we see actually a crash rate that's about 7 times higher than we see throughout the urbanized area. Those crashes have a higher level of injury rate. About 4% of crashes in the downtown area have involved a non-motorized user, but about 14% of the injuries are from a non-motorized or incurred to a non-motorized user. So what we've got is a safety problem, and that's the underlying condition that we need to look at. As a city, we have done a lot of things in cooperation with the State Department of Transportation to address transportation safety issues around the community. One of the best examples I would give is the Reserve Street Bridge, where the Reserve Street Bridge had a crash pattern. It had a safety issue that was identified, and that was crossover crashes where vehicles were drifting over the highway or over the center line and creating head-on crashes. And so through analysis, the city and the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is city, county, state, mountain line, regional authorities, implemented a solution, which was the barrier.
The Jersey barriers, right.
Down the center of the bridge. And that was a safety solution or an engineered solution to a safety problem. So I think that's the important context, is that we have a downtown street system that has a demonstrated safety issue, and that's the context that we're looking at in terms of moving forward.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that crash rate, because I think if you talk to the average person, they would say, oh, it's got to be Brooks, or it's got to be Reserve, or it's got to be some of these other places. Russell, certainly pre-construction on Russell. Russell's another example of that safety kind of issue, isn't it?
Yeah, but downtown there's a lot going on. There's left turns, there's bicyclists out of a lane, there's pedestrians, and we all know that in the hip strip area in particular, we're cramming a lot of things into minimum widths. So there's national guidance on what widths a street need, or different components of a street need to have. Parking lanes have to have a minimum width. Bike lanes have to have a minimum width, and so on and so forth. And what you see on the hip strip is that you have minimum widths next to minimum widths. So you've got a really small bike area right next to a minimum width parking area, next to a minimum width driving lane, and there's not a lot of space for any kind of human error or any kind of issue. And so part of what this is looking at is how to redesign within that right-of-way. We've got a fixed amount of space, and so what do we do within that fixed amount of space to make sure that we can fit in all the users in a way that is safe and efficient and meets the greatest number of needs?
One of the things, too, with that particular area, you think about how busy it gets during homecoming weekend, during, when college is coming back, all those, different things that go on, summer traffic, all those things. And a lot of people may not be that acquainted with the traffic patterns or when to walk, where's a bike lane, all of those kinds of things, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's a characteristic of a downtown. It's a busy area. There's a lot of different users. There's congestion. There's major events, as you mentioned, and they're all factors that influence that safety issue.
One of the things too is the history you mentioned about that a lot of the growth and development that happened after World War II was really building on what was laid out in the city's very early days. They were just like, well, we've got so many wagons and maybe some Model Ts, and now let's put streetcars. It's a classic case of a street that's had to adapt over many decades.
Yeah. But one of the things that's interesting is that as our transportation system has changed over the decades, as Orange Street's gotten busier, as Reserve Street has grown and gotten bigger, as we've replaced bridges, throughout the downtown and beyond, the Higgins Avenue traffic volumes have remained steady for decades, and that's really unusual. We've had hundreds of millions of dollars in private investment in our downtown over the last several decades, but our traffic counts on Higgins Avenue at the bridge have really remained steady. And I think that's a testament to a number of things. I think one means that people are utilizing other routes. It's the pattern of coming downtown. It's more efficient for a lot of people to use Orange Street or Madison Street or to access via another another route. And the other is that we've been really successful in getting people to utilize other modes to access our downtown. So the Missoula Public Library, when they were looking to build this facility, Missoula in Motion, which is a city transportation promotion organization, did survey work and looked at how people were getting to the library, and less than half of the people were driving alone to the Missoula Public Library, and that's remarkable. That's really unusual, and that's a function of our downtown being well designed for a variety of users to access. And so I think that's part of the picture, is that Higgins is maybe not the primary auto route downtown, but we've also done a really good job of getting people onto the bus and walking downtown and carpooling and using their bikes and that kind of thing.
We'll probably ask this of staff a little later on, but one thing comes to mind. You mentioned the bridge rebuilds with Madison. Obviously, Russell, the entirely brand new bridge, the widening on Higgins, those kinds of things. Is there some feeling that have we got a good snapshot of how that's sort of shaping up now that all this bridge construction has taken place? Has it really changed things?
Well, I think the first thing to highlight is that it's a generational investment in our community. So we have a lot of federal funds invested into these bridge facilities, and those will serve us for the next several decades to come. Russell Street has added a lot of capacity, both in terms of vehicle capacity, but also in terms of pedestrian and bicycle capacity as well. I don't know if anyone in the room ever tried to walk across or bike across the old Russell Street Bridge, but it was kind of harrowing. You had these narrow sidewalks. They weren't accessible to someone using a wheelchair. There was not a bike facility, and there were 2 lanes of traffic. So if there was an emergency vehicle and the bridge, I think Messi, the ambulance service, just didn't use that bridge most of the time because it was such a delay to try to get across that bridge. And so it was really a facility that was benefiting everyone. The Russell Street expansion and improvements benefited people who are driving. They benefited people who are using transit through these enhanced transit stops. And the bridge has these really nice shared use bike and pedestrian facilities that again allow people to cross the river in that location. So it added capacity for everyone.
And a big part of that, too, if you think about all 3 of these bridges, all 3 of them have been done since MDT started to employ a lot of the multimodal approach to things. So brings wider sidewalks, for example. I know coming over this evening, 6 people walking abreast across Higgins, a whole family, and you think you would have never seen that years ago.
Yeah.
So there's definitely been improvements in this newer form of transportation and goals.
I remember once when I was walking across the Higgins Bridge, and there was a person in a wheelchair in front of me, and we got partway across the bridge, and we encountered another person in a wheelchair coming across the bridge. And so we're in the middle of the bridge, and there's 2 individuals using wheelchairs, and one of them has to back up. And talk about a lack of dignity as far as how you get around. If if you can't access the community, and you know, you have to back up because there was you know, because the path was blocked. It just was a facility that didn't meet the needs of all of our community, and that's what we're in the business of doing, is building transportation facilities that work for our entire community.
I always used to hate it if you, as a photographer, you try to get pictures of people at, you know, weather like this down at Brennan's Wave, and you couldn't even set up a camera because somebody would come along and, you know, there'd be a bunch of people trying to go by. So that's certainly changed. Let's talk one thing. I want to kind of clarify the boundaries of what we're talking about here, because I think, as I mentioned at the outset, when you talk about all these different projects over time, we sort of, you know, as public, lose track of exactly what's being proposed where. So can you kind of give us a thumbnail of where to where, you know, point A to point B, what are we talking about?
Well, if I may, I'd like to actually zoom out a little farther.
Yeah, let's do that.
So when we do transportation planning as a community, we do that in a holistic manner. And so that looks at our transportation network, you know, our highway network coming through the community, whether it's from the Bitterroot through town or whether it's on the interstate through town. So we look at that level, and we also look at within the community. We have a transportation model that looks at different origin and destination pairs, and really simulates what traffic and what transportation and other modes is going to look like on the ground. So we do this planning level view, and we do a long-range transportation plan every 4 years, and that's in part a federally mandated document to receive and expend federal transportation funds, but it's also an opportunity for us to really do a deep dive into what we want our community to look like and how we want people to get around in the future. So we start at that level, and then we start identifying projects. And those projects could be, Brook Street needs to be reconstructed. It could be South Avenue needs to be reconstructed and have sidewalks and other facilities added. It could be that Highway 200 from East Broadway through East Missoula needs to have accommodations for getting safely under the railroad tracks.
And it could be smaller projects. You know, I think of the wheelchair, the curb cuts.
Yep, yeah.
Perfect example of that, where the transportation planning organization went through and identified that, and here are these places, and we took care of that.
Exactly.
So it could be small projects too.
So a few months back, we received a federal grant, a safety-oriented grant for South Avenue. That was a $9 million grant to improve South Avenue out by Fort Missoula. And that was a project that was in our priority list. It probably wasn't our very top priority. It probably wasn't at the top of the list. Maybe for someone in that area, it was at the top of the list. But for the city or the county, it wasn't our number one priority. But we saw an opportunity through this federal grant to apply for funds to fix South Avenue. And we received, because we applied for these federal funds, we received $9 million to improve South Avenue. And that's sort of how we do this. That's the context I wanted to set before we zoom into downtown.
Sure.
That we establish, this is our list of priorities within this long-range transportation plan that has a 40-year planning horizon. Right now, with the bipartisan infrastructure law, there are dozens of funding opportunities to apply for federal funds and really bring federal funds to build infrastructure in our community. And so late last year, in December, there was an announcement of a program called RAISE, and that's a really large-scale transportation grant program through the U.S. Department of Transportation. It was rebranded and expanded in the bipartisan infrastructure law that Senator Tester helped write, and that was where really this project and this combination of projects that we're referring to as the downtown safety and mobility projects. That's how they all got coupled together into one grant application. So for the context of these projects, there are really a couple of components. One of them is improvements to Higgins Avenue from Brook Street to Broadway. The other is the long-planned two-way conversion of Front and Main Streets. And then the third is trail improvements in the North Riverside Parks and Trails plan. And so, again, it was an opportunistic look at what all of the funding sources were, or what the funding source was, and what it was geared toward funding. And these projects were assembled in order to make the most competitive grant application possible.
So as we look at that, so let me just recap, make sure I understand, and we can explain. So we're talking about the Higgins improvements, right? And that's largely, like we've been talking about, the safety improvements, those kinds of things on there. The couplet, erasing the couplet essentially. And the couplets, everybody stands for front and main. Years ago, I think it was back in the 70s, as I recall, or quite some decade, even before.
Yeah.
But the concept at those times was we can get a better flow of traffic, we'll put a one-way couplet in. And I know for at least 10, 12 years, there's been talk of, changing that, right? And so that would convert that back to two-way traffic on both front and main,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is talking about the trails on the North Riverside part of it, right? So what's kind of the boundaries of that, roughly?
So that's roughly, the front and Main Street and the trail is roughly Madison to Orange. A little
Okay.
bit of nuance in there, but that's roughly the extent of all of the east-west work.
Okay.
And what we do when we look at these are really they're infrastructure grants, but they're also economic development focused. And so the downtown master plan, the first one in the early 2000s and the second one a couple of years ago, really looked at all of these corridors. And the first downtown master plan identified that something needed to happen with Higgins Avenue. The second downtown master plan further refined that and suggested a path forward, and also suggested the two-way conversion of Front Street and Main Street. And the reason for that is that one-way streets are actually, they're not good for business. And a two-way street has a demonstrable impact on businesses. And we looked at case study after case study and found that businesses do better when there's two-way traffic. We hear a lot about access to parking. And I think a great example of that is the Central Park parking garage down on Main Street, where you've got a one-way street and you have to go around the block.
Or
if you're coming from the wrong direction, and it's really difficult to make your way through our downtown if you're not really familiar with those streets. Really, again, these are based on looking at what works in other downtowns in terms of safety, in terms of access, and also in terms of providing an opportunity where businesses have the access that they need.
I know I've seen other communities that have gone through this one-way couplet versus two-way, and a lot of times they find that they'll do the study and they say, we end up with more vehicle trips per day, so it sort of spreads off the couplet because you have people doing exactly what you say, sort of the round around looking for parking or trying to come from the right direction or those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So that can be a problem. So we talked a little bit about goals. What's kind of the vision and we'll dive more into these details, but what's sort of our best outcome as we talk about where we'd like to be when all of this comes in about?
Yeah. Well, I think, so first of all, we have goals in our long-range transportation plan about mode split. And so that is by providing alternative options or by providing options for other modes, we will encourage the use of other modes. And I think one thing that I want to say right off the bat is that nobody is saying that people are not going to drive downtown or that they shouldn't drive downtown. That is a part of our access. That is how we build. That is the prevailing pattern for how we have built our transportation system for almost a century. And so that is the default. And nobody is saying that there is going to be any effort to reduce to make it difficult to drive into downtown.
Or try to make it car-free.
Exactly. Yeah. What it is about is providing options. Okay. And so it's about providing options for other users. It's about providing opportunities for everyone to get downtown. I go back to that example of the wheelchair users on the Bear Tracks Bridge, or the former Higgins Avenue Bridge, and I look at that as this as through the lens of all users. So we have a complete streets policy at the City of Missoula, and that is a policy where we have committed to looking at access for all modes, for all users, and to prioritize the most vulnerable user on down. And so this is about that, about providing those options and making it easy for people to get downtown.
And some of those improvements can be relatively subtle. I can recall a few years ago when communities started to add the little horns, the little tweets, those things for the visually impaired. Mm-hmm. Classic example, and everybody at first was like, what's that all about? Within a year or two, nobody remembered, was like, oh, it's just part of the landscape, right? Yeah. So this is really that kind of change we face but it's giving opportunities, right? And really making sure that we haven't left anyone out of the mix as we try to improve.
Yeah, and we've done some really interesting group walks, walk audits they're called, and what we've done, we call them inclusive interdisciplinary walk audits, and we take a group of people through whether it's the downtown area or through a transportation corridor, and we try to have a broad cross-section of ages, of physical abilities, and we just walk down the corridor, and we and we just kind of make note of how usable a corridor is. And one of these last year on Higgins Avenue involved a number of individuals in our community with visual impairments, some that used a cane, some that had a seeing eye dog, involved individuals using wheelchairs, involved people pushing strollers, involved just a wide cross-section of users. And it's amazing what you learn when someone who uses a cane to navigate has a really different set of or a really different experience than a sighted individual who's walking and can maybe see a sidewalk cafe and walk around it, or versus so really learning the experiences of all of our users is an important part of our planning process, and that's a part of how we approach planning. So I think that's kind of the context for this, for our complete streets policy, is really understanding how people experience our downtown, how people experience our transportation network, and making sure that it's accessible to everyone.
Is part of the vision then to give us adaptability in the future? Because, if we take a snapshot now and we say, boy, in 2023, 4, 5, we did this, we did that, we solved all the problems of the world, and then in 10 years we find out, I don't know, electric scooters are the way to get around, whatever it is, right? Some technology change or something changes. Is the idea also to keep sort of an eye over that horizon to say the space issues on the hip strip, let's give ourselves a little more room, something that's going to future-proof? Is that one of the visions?
I think a big part of that now is what we call curbside management. And so you've got parking along the curb. You've also got Uber drop-offs.
Yeah, that's really changed.
Yeah, you've also got a DoorDash person coming in to get a delivery. You've got a loading zone. You've got I think what has happened in recent years is that the curbside has actually become the most sought after space for all of these different activities, whether it's a transaction or whether it's parking or whether it's a bus stop or whatnot. And so we've done some planning through the long range transportation plan to look at we're calling them emerging mobilities, but kind of what are the trends that we might see, a dozen or a couple decades ago, we wouldn't have anticipated that you could call a car on your phone and have it show up 30 seconds later. That was not something that we anticipated in our planning in 2000, let's say. And so what we're trying to do now is anticipate not only all the things that are happening now and how they might evolve, but what's on the horizon. And so our team is really tries to be forward-looking, but we also don't want to build for something that doesn't exist and may not exist. So but it is definitely part of our planning effort.
As we go along here, if you come up with questions, Jenny, do we have the cards with us tonight? Okay, so if you get questions, and just flag Jenny, she can bring a card over, and we'll get some questions here in just a couple of minutes. Also, have some good staff members here to get further down into the details. A couple other questions before we move into that part. Tell me a little bit about, you mentioned the RAISE grants and those funds. What is that going to pay, A, and B, what are we looking at for our portion of a match?
Yeah. Well, and I would defer to our staff for the specific specific match amount. What the RAISE grant is generally is up to $25 million for projects that are transformative. I think most of these projects have usually federal grants it's usually like 13.42% local match required. Some of the grants under the bipartisan infrastructure law did not require any local match. RAISE. I'm not sure what the match requirement was for RAISE. It's certainly competitive to bring more local funds in order to elevate the match. What we really feel like is that over the last several decades, we've had like I mentioned at the outset, we've had several $100 million of investment in our downtown area, and that's been largely private investment. What's been missing has been the public investment. So this aims to bring public sector investment. You know, you look at Higgins Avenue, and it needs to be repaved. It has, I mean, it's, you look at the one-way streets, and they need to be repaved, and they needed to be actually completely rebuilt. The crown on the Higgins Avenue is,
It's like,
I mean, it's like,
it's not quite a ski slope, but
Yeah,
it's getting
it's close
close
to
in the
it.
winter, especially. Yes.
and these are the issues of that street having been built up and modified over the decades, and they really have not been we have not invested in them in an adequate manner. And so this is an effort to bring federal infrastructure money again to our downtown. In part, it's projects that need to be done in order to maintain that access. What's unique about the RAISE project is that it also really looks at those other modes, and so we could talk about the specifics of the project as it's proposed. Maybe we haven't
Yeah, we can get to
covered
that.
yet, but so the proposal in the RAISE grant is that Higgins between Brooks and Broadway, with a couple of exceptions, looks a lot like Higgins north of Broadway, between Broadway and the train station. So back in the using the recovery and reinvestment funds from the recession, that project was done in the around 2010, I think.
10, 12, yeah.
somewhere in there,
yeah.
And that was utilizing reinvestment or the stimulus funds from the.
And as I recall, that gave us our initial bike lanes downtown. It gave us the bump outs,
Yeah.
so people could have a little more visibility. There was some beautification things. There was a lot. State came back with signalization too as part of that.
Yeah, so that's a pretty typical cross section of what Higgins would look like. Now down by Brook Street, where where Highway 12 comes through, there's a couple blocks in there that are kind of a hybrid that have a little bit more travel lane capacity. But the accepted capacity of a 4-lane street is about 24,000 cars per day. A 3-lane street, interestingly, is about 22,000 cars per day. And what happens is that you get conflicts between left-turning users on a 4-lane system. So people on the hip strip right now, either there's a left-turn prohibition at times of day, or people queue up behind someone waiting to turn left. And when there's a left lane or a left turn prohibition at the intersection, someone could still turn left into, say, the Holiday gas
Well, that
station
never
parking
happens.
lot.
We never see that.
And so you get cars queuing up behind that, and it artificially limits the capacity. So that's why you see it's about 24,000 cars per day on that 4-lane system, and about 22,000 on the 3-lane system. So that's sort of the typical cross section that is in the grant on Higgins. The two-way streets are the front and main street, again, are two-way, a lane in each direction, and a dedicated bike facility like you see on North Higgins, one-way. And so Main Street would remain the westbound street, and Front Street would remain the eastbound street for that dedicated bike lane traffic. And so it's really kind of whatever fits. Again,
So
in the
bike
right
lane
of way.
would continue to have a direction, but the cars would be back to a two-way.
Yep.
Okay, I understand that. And one thing too, because I'm thinking of, the grant, we can get in more details with the staff here, but also I would imagine that this would be an opportunity to go through and take care of some of the subsurface work. And I'm specifically thinking the stormwater issues.
Yeah, stormwater,
Because, I mean, that
utilities,
is
all of
huge. Municipalities are seeing that all over. You go out on the coast, it's been a huge issue. Everything they do now, you have to think more about catchment systems and all those kinds of things. And I would imagine that would be part of our work as well as what happens below the pavement and below the sidewalks too. Yeah.
So the other thing to highlight is that none of this work occurs in a vacuum. So there's all of this planning work going on. There's also a citywide parking planning effort that.
Yeah, let's talk parking
Yeah.
because that's another whole wrinkle in this.
Yeah. And so there's a citywide effort to look at parking, not only in our downtown, but also more broadly. And that's been kicked off by the Missoula Parking Commission. And what they'll be looking at is, do we need another parking garage downtown? Do we need one on the hip strip? Do we need managed parking outside of downtown? So right now we have our downtown managed parking through the Parking Commission within their relatively narrow jurisdiction. Does that need to maybe expand to the hospital or to the into the hip strip? And so there's, what this will do is look at the next couple decades of parking need and where that need is and how to meet it. And so none of it's in a vacuum. There's, there's parking. The project as proposed does remove some on-street parking, and that is something that is important for people to know. It does remove some on-street parking, what we're looking at, though, is what does parking look like in the future? How do we steer people toward the existing off-street capacity? So the Rome student housing has a whole floor of publicly owned public parking. It's almost always vacant. How do we steer people into that? And that's what this parking study will be looking at.
Would the study also look at the question, because I've wondered this myself, but I've heard other people say, we have the parking structures on the north side of the river, but when you get down the hip strip, there's really nothing, down there at all. Would that be a part of the idea of capacity on that south side of the river too?
Yeah, potentially. There's some planned development in that area that could have a public parking component, and so that's what this parking study will look at. Really, is where does the next investment in public parking need to be? There's, of course, the library, the old library block, the Payne block, as we call it, from Terry Payne, who donated that block generously to the city. So there's potential for additional parking there. There's the riverfront triangle where there's potential for additional public parking. And again, it's just part of an ecosystem. There's this whole transportation ecosystem, and it involves all modes, and we plan for all of them.
Great, good. Well, let's go ahead and should we open up for questions, or are there? Yeah, let's do that.
Maybe
let's introduce our staff. Who do we have with us tonight?
So we have Jeremy Keene, our Director of Public Works and Mobility. We have Aaron Wilson, who's our Transportation Director. We have Ellen Buchanan from the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, and we have Macy McPherson from the Missoula Redevelopment Agency as well. And so everyone here provides a different angle into this project and has good expertise. For when I go
we could tap it. I may want to come to him with some questions here, but just check with our audience. Anything right off? And again, staying on topic here right now as we're talking about the Higgins corridor work and associated projects. Anything right off? Okay. Yeah, Scott. Okay, sure. Let me get a mic over here on you. Go ahead.
So I was thinking, as you were talking about like potential parking structures and stuff like that, like wouldn't it be a good idea to, when you have the future former City Hall site, that could be a good use for potential parking garage. It can be next to the transit center so people can park there and utilize public transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. So when the city and the county move into the federal building in a few years, we'll have the opportunity to really look at what the City Hall block gets used for, and also the county admin building. There's a redevelopment opportunity there. So we don't know what that will be, and want to be very clear that there's no plan for that now, but an opportunity to have a community conversation about what happens on that site. That could include, as you mentioned, it could include a transit facility. It could include some kind of parking component. It could certainly include mixed use with retail and housing, but an opportunity to do something transformative there, for sure.
I'd like to bring, where'd Jeremy go? Oh, here, Jeremy, go ahead and stand up here. I want to talk a little bit about the mobility piece. Go ahead and stand right here for us so we're on camera. Let's dive into a little more detail on the mobility question. We talk about safety. What are, the mayor mentioned about, some of the walking tours, those kinds of things. Well, give us an example. What's kind of a snapshot of some of the things, the problems that we've seen that have been illustrated out there by folks who may have different challenges in terms of mobility?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. We already talked about the previous issues with the bridge and the narrowness of those. That happens in other areas of Higgins and Front Main as well, where you don't have enough sidewalk space to fit all of the different uses that are going on there. And the bike traffic that we see is also utilizing sidewalks because they don't want to be in the lanes. And so part of what we see when you come across the south side of the bridge, now we have this nice wide walkway, bikeway. And when you get to the south side of the bridge, you're dumped out either into traffic or you're on the sidewalk. And so being able to provide those separate spaces for those different uses, for them to happen in a safe way and correct some of those issues, We can also do better with defining bus stops, creating space for those bus stops, for shelters or benches, for creating those corner extensions, the curb bulb outs to shorten the crossing distances and allow people to be seen better and get across the street in a shorter amount of time. So those are all little pieces that help improve that overall environment. And I think the other big one that we really haven't talked about very much is street lighting. And we, in downtown, we have some very old street lights. They don't do a good job of lighting the street. And in the places where we've been able to improve that lighting, like the north part of Higgins, north of Broadway, you can really see the difference in the quality of the light, in the safety that it provides, and the environment it provides, especially during the dark months of the winter when we spend a lot of time in the dark. And so it's an important element, and that's something that would be included in this project.
And when we talk about that too, I would imagine that part of its educational component, and I know you guys, the mobility program works at, our program works really much on that, but it also gives people an expectation, right? I'm thinking of this because as I came over tonight, turned off Bear Tracks, guy was riding in the bike lane. I didn't know if he was going to, keep continuing the bike. No, he bailed off and went on the sidewalk. So that's part of it, is to give an expectation so people know there's something to use, right, as part of that system.
Yeah, I think predictability is really important. And as things get busier, as you have more different activities, providing those separate spaces really tends to lead to better safety.
And what about newer approaches, newer technology? I brought up, just because I love the topic, the electric scooters, which seem to have gone away for now. But what about other tech that may come along, or other mobility pieces? How are you looking at that and trying to visualize where this may be in even 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a crystal ball, but we do look at what's happening with technology, and there's a lot of interesting things happening. Electric bikes, I think, have really taken off. I think sales of electric bikes in the U.S. expanded by 3 times in the last couple of years. So we're seeing that as a really viable transportation mode. We're going to see more of them, and I think that we also learned an awful lot during the pandemic about what we can do with transportation relative to flexible work and working from home and using technology for things like that. So it's constantly evolving. Cities evolve. It's part of the game that you always have to be looking out what's going to happen in 10 years or 20 years.
Yeah. Any concern about self-driving cars? Is that part of this equation or what?
Yeah, I'm not there yet, but they're coming. We know that, right? We're going to see those in our lifetime, and how they'll affect the way we get around. There's a lot of speculation about that, but a lot of people are changing the way they think about owning a car. We may, in 20 or 30 years, not own cars. We just be part of a car service. And I think one of the interesting things is if you look at what young people are interested in right now, there's a lot less interest in owning or driving a car, and more interest in living in a place where they can get around without a car. And I think that talking about what's the future going to look like, we need to think about what are those generations going to want for transportation, and it's not necessarily what we are used to and what we do.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate that. Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to. I've got a 55 Chevy Hot Rod. I swear it's going to go down in money with each passing year the way things are going. So, Mayor, when we talk about this too, is there a particular horizon? Are we talking, this is a 10-year plan? Is it a 20-year plan? Is it, is there a threshold or a horizon that we're trying to shoot for here, or just what?
Well, our long-range transportation plan is a multi-decade plan. It's a 40-year plan. 40-year? 30-year. It's a 30-year plan, which is a long time to plan for. The only thing we know about our 30-year plans is that they're wrong. That's the only thing we know about any of our predictions about 30 years in the future. What we try to do is make a plan about about what we need to do, and then we develop a project list, and that project list is cost constrained. And so it is within our current funding environment what's possible within this 30-year time frame. And then a lot of the funding is actually just opportunistic. We have a couple $100 million of infrastructure needs within the city of Missoula. We do not have a couple $100 million of funding, in the foreseeable future. We have local streets that need to be repaired before they deteriorate to the point of needing to be fully rebuilt. We have across the country and across the state and throughout Missoula, we have an infrastructure deficit. We have been underinvesting in infrastructure for decades, and we see that that's not just transportation infrastructure. That's water and wastewater. That's utilities. It's all of these infrastructure types and categories that we've been underinvesting in. And so what we do is we try to manage our scarce resources. You might see that our streets department might do a thin lift of asphalt in the center of a driving lane on a local street, where it would have been better to pave the whole thing, but they're trying to get a little bit more life out of that in order to be the most efficient with our relatively small amount of transportation funding that we have. And then you see these more transformative projects that involve a federal grant. So out west on the west end of town, the Setupkane area, the Mullen Area Build Grant, where we received $13 million in federal funds to build a connection of Mary Jane Boulevard. What that does is it creates a pressure relief valve for Reserve Street by creating another north-south connection between Broadway and Mullen. And so the actual fund, the plan horizon is 30 years. The actual, okay, this is what we're going to fund next. We have, like I said, we had a prioritized list, but then especially with the federal funding environment right now, where there could be new federal funds coming available on a rolling basis, we try to plug the right project in so that we're submitting the most competitive grant. Because really what we want to do is bring those competitive funds into the community. We have our team, our transportation team has been phenomenally successful at bringing in grant funds, just disproportionately successful, and actually are frequently asked to give webinars or give presentations to other cities as to what our secret is. And I always tell them they should go a little astray. But no, it's just been wildly successful because of this approach that we've taken.
Well, and it's interesting too because of our waterfront, because of the river, because of the the varied pattern, the limited growth really in a valley. There are a lot of things that we have to consider and think about for sure. So,
one thing that I'd like to add, I want to acknowledge there are some business owners in the room who have been active and have been engaged in recent weeks, and I want to acknowledge that and say that I appreciate that. And one of the things that I think because of this rushed timeline. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this project, but these federal funds, these grant cycles, they come together, and it's all hands on deck to submit an application, and I think that over the coming weeks, we have a number of meetings that we're setting up with local downtown businesses to talk about some of the nuts and bolts and the specifics. And if we receive these grants and receive this money to come into our community, we'll have an opportunity to go block by block and business by business and fine-tune some of the details. And that's one of the things that I think is really important, and I'd welcome any questions, but that's one of the things that I think is really important about this process is that when the Bear Tracks Bridge was being built, there was a group that got together and did final design work, and they took into account, the loading zone requirements of the Wilma Theater, for example, and they made some design decisions to change that in order to work for those businesses. And so through this design process, there will be a similar process to go through and look, at on a block by block basis. Okay, maybe we need to shift this thing a little bit in order to accomplish the objective, or to not negatively impact this business or that business. And so that's forthcoming if and when we get the grant, and the conversations, we can continue to have conversations over the next several months about.
I can't recall the exact quote, but I know when the infrastructure bill was pushing through, I remember asking Senator Tester that, because in 2008 there was such a rush after the recession, everything had to be shovel ready, and I think he said something to that effect. He said this time we have a little bit more time. We'll have to get the money, but there is time to refine and go from there. So, what about it? Any questions? Yes. Go ahead and stand up. Let me get over to you here. Give us your name, too. So,
my name's Owen Kelly. I'm a downtown businessman, not a business owner, but a businessman. But I need to preface my question with a quote from a Missoulian article from January 24th of 2006, roughly 3 months after the Broadway road diet was implemented. The title of the column was "Broadway Diet Comes to an Abrupt End." Then Mayor John Engen was quoted as saying, "It's not working on any front." The article goes on to say, beginning right away, city and state traffic specialists will work on ways to restore the road to 4 lanes, maybe 5. And as we all know, we're still dealing with the Broadway road diet 17 years later. So my question is, if the Higgins Avenue Corridor plan is implemented and has later decided it wasn't a good idea like the Broadway road diet was at the time anyway. With the construction of raised bike lanes, will there be any going back?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Good question. Thank you.
And I guess I'd start with the Broadway road diet. And I think that there were, this predates my involvement in city politics, but I think that at the time there were some implementation things about that could have been done a lot better. The transition westbound from Broadway, before Orange Street, was a little clunky. The lanes didn't line up quite right. The signage wasn't great. What I will say, and I would challenge, personally, I would challenge the notion that it's been a failure. I think in the 10 years before that project, there were 5 pedestrian fatalities. In the 15 years since, there has not been a single fatality. And so that, it was a safety measure, and that is what the address, that was what it was intending to address. And so I think we need to be really deliberate about what we're intending to address with Higgins. And to me, it really is all about that crash history. But we do have to. We have to design things well. We have to do a good job with implementation. The Higgins project would be implemented. It would be a more capital-intensive project where it would be implemented as a package versus that Broadway road diet was paint on the ground, and it was not implemented with the full level of transitions that it should have been. And so that's kind of my caution, is that I think that was implemented in a way that was inadequate. I know people don't like it. I know some people don't like it. I think the safety benefits, though, it's part of that trade-off, and to me, that's a real success. That the fact that we haven't had those fatalities in those intervening years.
I'd like to bring Aaron up. We'll get to your question. Just Aaron, come up for a second, because this raises a question. It's more of an engineering question, perhaps. But what about, as he was asking, what about the possibility of, if something changes, maybe bike lanes are as important. Maybe they need, some revision down there. Can something be designed in such a way that it can have some flexibility in the future?
Sure, I think it can be. We want to be intentional about the projects we do and design for the future that we want to see based on our goals and our policies. And so that's what we're always striving to do. We come up with these plans is to implement those policies. But I think we do try to put as much flexibility into those facilities as possible. So Bear Tracks Bridge, perfect example. That was a great investment. As Mayor Hess said, it's a generational investment. So all of that money is not going to go to waste. Regardless of what we do with it today, we have that capacity for how things might change in the future. Obviously, raised bike lanes like we have north of Broadway are a more permanent solution than striping on the ground. And so maybe that's something we could look at and have conversations. I think there are a number of ways you could accommodate this. But there are other challenges too, like drainage and pedestrian crossings, and how do you maintain those facilities. So we're taking all that into account when we do designs.
I know that was one thing as we were talking about pedestrian access, especially, and I always think of a winter like this one, where the poor pedestrians are here, there's a berm, they've got a mountaineer over in the middle of the crosswalk, and a lot of times that there's snow removal issues because of design too. Is that something, how will this help us in one of those real practical problematic situations?
Well, snow removal is always a challenge. It doesn't really matter what design you have. And we work really closely with our streets department to figure out what is the best design. So where are you going to put snow, and how do you move it around, and how do you maintain? And I think the design that we have provides more space for that. So you don't have these sub-minimum lane widths, and you're trying to plow the snow into the middle, and you end up with a lane and a half instead of 2 lanes in each direction all winter long. And so we'll have more space to do that in this design. We'll have the center turn lane where you can store some snow there while you're trying to get the rest of the street plowed, and then you come back and pick it up. So I think we're trying to build a lot of flexibility in on the maintenance side.
If we can just get rid of, I think it's on Main, those deep things. I remember my first winter here was really bad, and I can recall getting in my Jeep and getting stuck because it was like this. So if you could fix that, I'll be happy. So
Sure, yeah, no problem.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Question back here, come on up. That's right here, I think. Right here. Let me get you on the camera. I'm waiting on that. Got it. Oh. Face the camera here. So,
Hi.
Yeah, that's good. You're good. Go ahead.
I'm Danny Tedenbaum. This is weird. Hi, Jordan. My question is, you mentioned that, first of all, thanks for doing this event. It's really helpful. You mentioned that vehicle trip counts on Higgins Street Bridge have remained level over the years. What has been the recent trend in the past couple of years with Mountain Line?
As far as Mountain Line ridership?
Yeah.
You know, Mountain Line ridership, when they first went zero fare in 2015, I believe, or right around there, they saw an immediate 40% spike in their ridership. So they went from about 1 million rides a year to about 1.4 million immediately, or over a very short period of time. That continued to notch upward over right up until the start of the pandemic. Transit ridership around the country, well, actually, transportation around the country cratered during that time. It's really interesting. There's some permanent traffic counters on Beckwith and Orange Street, and there's another one somewhere in town. And it was really interesting to look at a chart in spring of 2020 where vehicle traffic cratered. So Mountain Line's ridership fell. I want to say, I'm not going to get the figure wrong, but it was in excess of 50%. It has rebounded, not entirely to the pre-pandemic level, but it has come close. As Mountain Line added their Sunday service, and then the later evening service and the expanded service on Saturdays, that did have a ridership uptick as well. And so it has been significantly increased as they increase service. And what I would say is that, my background before this work is in public transportation, and without fail, frequency drives ridership. So when Mountain Line moved to the 15-minute frequency, so they doubled frequency from 30 minutes to 15 minutes, and they more than doubled ridership on those routes. And so a doubling of frequency generally yields more than a doubling of ridership, just because the service becomes more convenient. If you're riding a bus that comes once an hour, you're either 55 minutes early or 5 minutes late, and neither one of those is really all that desirable. And so when you can get the frequency down to every 15 minutes, you don't need a schedule. You just walk out the door, and the bus shows up, and you get to your event or your appointment or whatever it is. And so that frequency, once you get into that 15-minute range, it really drives ridership.
Is your thinking, Danny, that perhaps more people have shuttled over to transit as opposed to driving, or do you think that's had an impact?
I can just say anecdotally, I mainly ride the 5 and the 6, and occasionally take the bus out to the airport. And just in the past half of a year, like the past 6 months, since frequency sort of bumped up and Sunday service started, a lot more people are riding the bus, and it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Well, another thing is like
Thank you, Dean.
Maybe a shift worker at the mall or in retail or at that you never want to rely on the last trip of the day. And so having the bus go till 11 o'clock versus 9 o'clock. That's a big deal for someone who's working
Especially food service or any of those things. Yeah, exactly.
In retail, it makes a big difference. When I worked at the university, we saw a huge increase when Mountain Line went to that 15-minute service. We saw a huge increase in faculty riding the bus, in all sorts of users riding the bus. When it went zero fare, we also saw a big increase in so that zero fare was a great piece for someone who maybe they couldn't afford the bus, the 85 cents, or then it went to $1 fare. But it also was a big benefit for people who just didn't have exact change or didn't have. It was a huge benefit for everyone, and those things to make the transit service more usable really do have an impact in our community. Missoula has a higher than average. For a community of our size, we have a much higher than average share of people biking, walking, and taking the bus to work, as measured by the census. And that's, I think, a function of the quality of service that we provide.
What I'm going to be interested to see, too, and this is more of a long-term trend, is the cost of car ownership is getting so onerous for a lot of folks that, it comes to the point of, I can't afford a $60,000, $70,000 car. Buses make more sense, or I'm going to get an electric bike or something like that.
Well, and you may see, an electric bike or a transit usage. You may see that a 3-car household becomes a 2-car household, or a 2-car household becomes a 1-car household. And you have the car for the family access to recreation or whatnot, but you might you might tweak your commute trip. Or so it's little things like that that could change, that could make a meaningful impact in people's lives. Housing is the highest household cost as a sector, but or as an expense. But transportation is the second highest household cost. And so if you can reduce your transportation expenses, whether it's by living close to work or by having access to these other options, that can be a major part of our housing challenges in solving that. Like by providing high quality transit service, that is a housing affordability measure. By providing access to safe bike facilities, that is a housing affordability measure. And again, it might be that a household that previously needed multiple cars decides that one's enough, or something like that.
Question for anybody that just crossed my mind. Electric vehicles, does this throw a curve? Do we plan for that? Is that part of our thinking at this point, or is that more, no, people will charge at home or they'll charge out on the freeway? Charging stations, yeah. Anything along that? Jeremy, we'll let both of you. It just crossed my mind.
Yeah, we, actually just in the last few days, we found another grant opportunity, and there is funding for electric charging, and we're looking at how we might partner with the previous RAISE grant that we just did to add the electric charging stations in downtown. So there's a great opportunity, right? So people can come to downtown, park their car and charge while they go do something fun.
Yeah, that's why I asked, Aaron.
Just going to say, I think there's good economic development tools there too. When we look at sort of national corridors, and I-90 is one of the primary national corridors, and downtown is right off of I-90. We have 2 interstate interchanges there, and so rather than putting all of your charging infrastructure way out of town at a gas station where people are just stopping to get gas, they go and then they're on their way, you have to stop for 20 to 30 minutes to get a good charge. That 20, 30 minutes could be downtown. All of those people are then in downtown spending money, spending time there, and so you're getting additional business if you can build the infrastructure in. So that's something I think we're really interested in looking at as a economic development tool, not just the infrastructure to accommodate people who live in Missoula.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't mean to throw a curve there, but that just crossed my mind, Mayor. So that's what happens. I'd like to get Ellen to come up here. I know Ellen doesn't ever like to be on camera with me, but come on. I'm teasing. She's fantastic. The mayor has talked about the economic development and this private development. And certainly we see, the hotel development. We see a lot going on down there. How important is it to sort of support what's there, but then also give us some opportunities for further development down the road?
Oh, I think it's critical. And what we've seen downtown is, the impact of Park Place parking structure was incredible. And the way that unfolded, First Interstate Bank had an obsolete facility. They had to make a decision about, are we going to rebuild here, or are we going to go out and do a greenfields development like a lot of the other banks were doing at that point in time, because it's less expensive. If we're going to build here, do we build what's really needed? Do we do the right thing and build a Class A office building, which we did not have in downtown? Come to the city, say, will you create an urban renewal district so we can look at a parking garage? That parking garage has been the catalyst for 3 hotels, Rome student housing, incredible investment. It's just as a result of that. So, and now I think we need to be thinking about what we do about north of Broadway. We have surface parking lots all over the place here that I just see as opportunities for development. And we need housing downtown. Those are the places where it can be built, but you got to park cars. So where would you put a parking structure in the northern portion of downtown, which really didn't see as much impact as the southern portion did, or parts of the southern portion did when Urban Renewal District 1 was in effect. So those are some of the things we're kind of looking down the road at. And with respect to that two-way conversion on Front and Main, one of the things you see with a one-way couplet is you've got 50% out-of-direction traffic. That doesn't help air pollution. It doesn't help anything, and it adds to congestion. And the only 3 public parking structures that we have in downtown are there are only 2 one-way streets.
And I noticed too, our hotels are now on that same system, aren't they? Really, the new ones. Anyway.
They are, and the garage is what let them do that. But the other thing we need to be looking down the road at is, how do you design parking structures in a way that they can be converted to something else when people do in fact transition how they get around from a single occupancy vehicle. And that's going to happen.
With something like this, does it, from the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, how much of a selling point is it to have this kind of investment and open up some different opportunities there as you're talking to different people with ideas and developers?
Well, I think, wherever you have the opportunity to take advantage of tax increment funding, you have a much better opportunity for private development to occur. And we see that today. I mean, look at what's happened south of Broadway since the first urban renewal district sunsetted in 2005, and look at what hasn't happened north of Broadway. Almost all of the new investment in downtown has been in the two urban renewal districts of Front Street and Riverfront Triangle. Stockman Bank, First Interstate Bank, 3 hotels, new public library, student housing. I mean, it's all happened in the urban renewal districts. We've had one major project north of Broadway since the first urban renewal district sunsetted, and that's the Garlington office building.
Yeah, and that's it.
That's it. And I've racked my brain trying to think of anything else, but that's it. And that speaks volumes about, they'll build it anyway. They don't.
It's not a build it and they will come, right? You found that out a long time
Yeah.
ago.
And I think, a lot of the business owners, I think, understand that the conversion of Front and Main to two-way is going to be of great benefit to them, even if there is some on-street parking that's lost.
Okay, good. Thank you. Question here. Carl, let me get this fella. He's been up a couple of times here. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Gregory Daggett, and I have a question building off of both parking and business. And I was curious, will businesses have the option to convert street parking to eating or cafe spaces where people can lounge and take up, if it makes sense for them as a business to expand into the roadway, and if there would be any possibility of that in the future? I've seen that done Europe or other cities to great effect.
Yeah.
What about that? That's a good question, Gregory. Yes.
Yeah, and I don't know that we've had that conversation. I think that as part of this parking planning process, we can look at that. We do have a sidewalk cafe program, and that has been wildly successful as far as providing opportunities for people to establish, a cafe presence or something like that. I know a lot of places did that on a temporary basis during the pandemic, and then a lot of places left those temporary conversions permanent. I know in Denver, there's a whole street that is just essentially a big sidewalk cafe now. The downtown master plan has the Patty Street is considered a big plaza, and it has a lot of cultural elements that really go from the river all the way up to the train depot. And I think there's opportunities to treat certain streets differently. And I think that there's opportunity there. I also think that we can certainly talk about that through this planning process. And whether it's temporary, whether it's seasonal, whether it's event driven or whatnot, I think that's a good community conversation to have.
I want to mention too, we'll go for a few more minutes, but if you're watching the stream and you have any calling questions, you can call us in at 546-7692, 546-7692. So if you're watching at home and would like to chime in, go ahead and call those in. Yes, Carl.
In regards to Higgins Street, you're going to lay the curb down, right?
Yes.
You can mark the street any way you want when you want to line it off, change or whatever. The lines change.
You mean after the curb is down?
Yeah.
New curbing?
Yeah, you can put whatever you want for lines on that street. And let's build on the future of this city. You've got to attract businesses to downtown where the individuals will actually live downtown without the vehicle and utilize the river frontage for the entertainment. And if they need to use a vehicle to get out, they can utilize something else to get out elsewhere. We need to attract some businesses where they got in-house living and association kind of businesses. You got to attract money. Money is what builds structure and so forth. And my second thought, do you have an aerial photographs in the office of your city?
We have in the
everywhere.
that you use actually to change your dynamics of planning this city?
We have, especially in Ellen's conference room, in the Missoula Redevelopment Agency
huge.
conference room, there's a great big wall. It's almost like a wallpaper of aerial photo, and it comes in handy in nearly every meeting.
I've seen many times they'll stand up and start pointing at the picture. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I know Aaron and Jeremy as well. I mean, all of their work, they're constantly looking at different aerial perspectives and drawings and renderings and trying to get that look too. So that's where technology helps out a lot right now. So any other questions? I'm looking at our business folks or anything like that. I'm going to ask a devil's advocate question. So let's pretend, and this is a leap because these people know I'm not smart enough to run a business. But if I'm an existing business downtown and I'm on Higgins, or I'm on the hip strip, let's use that example. And I'm, trying to do best I can, trying to squeeze in, get along with my fellow neighbors, not put too much out on the sidewalks, not obstruct bikes, hope that people can find a place to park. What is this going to do for me? What will it do for those, smaller and maybe medium-sized businesses on the corridor?
Yeah. Well, I think, and I think one of the things, particularly for the hip strip, is that it'll make it a really nice place to be. It's already a nice place to be, but it'll make it a nice place to get around. It'll be a little bit less squeezed when you're trying to access local businesses on the hip strip. And I think that's why the Big Dipper, Charlie Beaton, Amy McQuilkin from Betty's Divine, Alex Gallego across the street, wrote a really nice guest column talking about how they think this will transform the hip strip into a place that isn't just a place you pass through, but a place where you like to spend time on the sidewalk and whatnot. And so, I mean, the hip strip businesses have been really supportive of this proposal. I think because of how they see it being able to transform their businesses into something that is more beneficial for their future as a business owner. The hip strip is distinct from the other side of the bridge because the zoning is different, the parking requirements are different. There's a little bit more constraint there as far as what a business would have to do in terms of providing parking if they wanted to expand or whatnot. And so I think I don't want to speak for the businesses, but generally what we've heard from those business owners is that they favor these changes.
Is it the type of thing too that as this happens, so I want to picture this. So I'm a driver, I'm a shopper, I'm going down through the hip strip, I'm trying not to lose my mirrors, right? Which is kind of I've seen that happen many times. What will that look like when this project's done? What's that going to be like?
Well, when I started at the beginning, I talked about minimums next to minimums.
Right.
So you've got a sidewalk, which the sidewalk's not the minimum, but it's not all that generous either.
No.
And then you've got a parking lane that's the minimum, and you've got driving lanes that are minimums, and they're right next to each other, and you get a little bit of snow piled up, and it really does constrain things, and it really does create that side swipe risk, that left turn risk.
We've certainly seen it this winter, especially.
Yeah. And so one of the things that if you drop an 11-foot travel lane out of that, you can distribute that over the rest of the uses. So that whole cross section becomes a little bit wider, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit easier to filter through.
And dedicated bike?
Yes.
Is that where we're talking about the raised lane?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just trying to visualize it in my mind, so I've got it.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as, so if we go to 3-lane, what is that configuration like?
Yeah, as far
Aaron,
as the specific cross section?
Yeah. I mean, what's the traffic pattern? What happens to that Highway 12 traffic that peels off there? Aaron, can you help us out with that? I mean, what are we going to see on the ground, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I think what we see is that we actually accommodate where people want to go, that Higgins is a destination. It's not a through street that like Reserve Street where you have a lot of traffic that's going somewhere. It ends in downtown, and it is the place that people are using Higgins as a destination. So that 3-lane section really facilitates that you are turning off. So you need to make a left turn onto Main Street. And one of the, just kind of anecdotally being out on the street, when you see congestion on Higgins, a lot of times it's a person trying to turn left, or you have 3 or 4 cars turning left and all of the vehicles stacking up behind them. So you separate those uses. or those movements on the street, and that will become more efficient. So the through traffic moves through, the left turning movement turns left where you want to turn. You pair that with the two-way restoration on Front and Main, and suddenly you're not going a block out of your way, circling around the block again, having to cross through those intersections multiple times to get where you need to go. You go to the intersection, you turn, you park once, and then you can go where you need to go in the downtown. So you're creating the efficiency of trying to accommodate where people want to go, as opposed to a 4-lane that isn't really efficient for that, where you have to restrict left turning movements and people are going out of the way, adding additional mileage to their trip and not being able to get to their destination. Maybe they get frustrated and they go.
So we're talking about having that one north, one south, and then the turn lane is our third lane, right? What happens at 12 or 12 peels off?
Yeah, at Highway 12, we maintain the capacity because that's where we really see the volume on Higgins is between 5th and Brooks. And so we maintained those travel lanes. So the right turning movement as you're coming northeast on Brooks, you get onto Higgins and you have that right turn lane onto 6 where we see a lot of the traffic going. So we maintain that. We do the same on coming south on Higgins. We have that right turn lane onto Brooks and the through lane. So we maintain that capacity to facilitate the traffic where we're seeing it. And then as you get north of that, we see volumes drop off. It's much more efficient, and we can accommodate that very easily with a 3-lane section.
And I would imagine that's where signage comes in, say at Brooks, as you're doing that corner, because then people clearly know this is your lane, right? Stay in your lane.
Yeah, good lane markings are really important, signage, and we already have a lot of that. You know, if you're taking that Highway 12 route, you have to be in that right lane anyways. Otherwise, you're going to miss your turn onto 6th Street. So, you know, we're facilitating that. That doesn't change all that much, and it's the same if you're coming west on 5th, trying to take Brooks on Highway 12. You have to be in that outside lane, and we maintain that, and we'll have good signage, and it won't dramatically change how those couple of blocks operate.
What about the surrounding streets? You know, we already went to the one-way on 5th a couple of years ago to facilitate bikes and safety on that. Any changes, Brooks, say, south, or any of those surrounding streets? Will we have to accommodate anything there in terms of turning patterns or anything like that? Is that part of what we have to look at?
Yeah, potentially, and we'll see growth and, you know, a lot of development in the hip strip in particular and in downtown, and so we're going to just see a lot more activity on all the streets, and we want to make sure that they stay safe, that people can get where they're going, and so I think we look at that as we go, but I think we'll see actually less traffic on those side streets because people won't have to go around the block multiple times with the one-way streets and the left turn prohibitions, and so it will just be more efficient.
He's been tracking me. He's seen me do that. You know, the Missoula Indy 500, whatever it is. Yeah, Missoula 500. Any other questions back here? Carl? Okay. Well, I'd prefer question. You got a question?
Well, how do you get people to get out of their 5G driving mode and bring it down to 3G driving mode? Because I sat there on 5th and Higgins, and if their brakes were not up to snuff, there have been some carnage there and so forth. And it's because they're driving 5G where they should be driving 3G.
Yeah. What about that with, you know, that type of thing as far as that impacting safety too? I mean, speeds and those things.
A lot of it's about the roadway design. So street trees, parked cars, these things slow traffic. They create visual cues that you should slow down versus, you know, coming off of the highway, you know, people come off the highway at Van Buren and there's a lot of high-speed turns onto Broadway there just because you're in that mode of, you've been on the highway and you're in that mode. And so downtown is a place where we do want people to slow down. We want them to be safe. We want them to drive at a safe rate of speed. Fatalities of a pedestrian struck at 25 miles an hour are below 20%. Fatalities of a pedestrian struck at 35 miles an hour are above 80%.
Yeah.
So it's speed kills, and it's something that we have to be designing for, and it's something that we can do through design. You know, posting
calming features, I think, is the you know,
posting
the
a speed
technical
limit
term,
doesn't control speed, but designing a street that has visual cues that you ought to slow down is what actually controls speed, and so that's a big part of the design process. And I want to reiterate again that these three projects together were packaged into this grant through opportunity, opportunity to bring significant federal funds to our downtown. We have a lot of work to do to continue to make sure that we complete the final design. And so over the next several weeks, we're doing some small group meetings with downtown businesses that are getting set up right now, and we're planning another opportunity for a bigger town hall meeting in May to really bring those ideas together. And so there's a lot of fine tuning the specific. The specifics of little areas along this plan. And that's part of the process. We will continue to engage, and we continue to welcome the feedback, and we'll continue to listen to what people are concerned about and what they're excited about.
So to clarify, so the grant has not actually been sent in.
Oh, the grant is in, but once the grant
But then we can come
through,
back, like you say.
Then we have, in the period between now and grant award, but then also there's a whole final design process. So this is not what you'd call a shovel-ready project,
Right.
where the grant arrives and then the next day the bulldozers are out, or the project went out to bid. There's a final design process. So there's a percentage of the design that there's a percentage of design work that's been completed, but it's not a construction-ready document yet. So we'll continue to have those conversations as far as again, the block by block issues and concerns.
This kind of gets down a little too far. I don't want to go too deep on this, but MDT, because this is obviously state highway. You have to have them. I know they're involved in the TPO and Transportation Planning Organization, so they have that seat at the table all the time. But the question has been put to me, and I think there was even some press coverage on this. Well, MDT, if this goes through, the MDT has to sign off on it. Can you clarify that a little bit in terms of, especially because we are dealing with state highway?
Yeah, so these are state-owned routes, and we can't just go and do something on a state-owned route without the state's consent. That's that we don't own them as a city. So the state is I would say very cautious, very slow to they're not going to rush out and do something that is that's a drastic change to their roadway. What I will say is that our staff have done a ton of work with MDT, and they wrote a letter of support for this grant, and so they're in a position where they're comfortable with how the system will function. What we've seen over the years is that MDT, again, is really cautious. They're really conservative in their approach to change. What I think it's a testament to the work that our staff did with them, that they actually wrote a letter of support for this grant because of the thoughtfulness of the proposal.
Any fears that because we've had so much investment on these big 3 bridge projects in the last 10 years, does that hurt our chances? Does it help our chances?
So I think that one of the best things going for our chances is that every grant has a benefit to cost ratio associated with it. And so there's a benefit associated in reduction in fatal crashes or serious injury crashes, and there's all sorts of benefits that are scored with some actuarial method that's standardized across the country. And this has one of the highest benefit cost ratios. I mean, it has a ratio of about 5 to 1, and that is really
That's pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, we appreciate everybody coming by and having questions. Looking around the room one last time. Oh, here we go. I thought I saw some movement over this way. So, yeah, you're fine right there. I'll come to you.
So when are we going to start seeing hardcore plans for which streets are going to be tightened up, or is Higgins Bridge going to be made 1 lane? When is that kind of stuff coming out?
So through this grant process, it would be this spring as far as whether or not the grant is received. It'd be later in the year. But we'll get that information this year, this fall, I want to say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. He mentioned something that I've had in my mind too. One final question, because I think when this started, we had just finished Bear Tracks Bridge, and so there was this feeling, oh my gosh, we just barely got this new wide bridge. We got 4 lanes, even though it's a little tight when there's snow in the middle. Any change on the 4 lanes on the bridge, how does that affect this on either end?
Well, the bridge, like I think Jeremy mentioned, the bridge has the capacity, And so the bridge, it's really how it's striped and how it ties into the rest of the project. So the bridge has the capacity to be striped in 3 or 4 lanes. We've received feedback, complaints really, that the 12-foot and 13-foot wide sidewalks, they're shared use paths, that they're congested, and that we've received complaints from pedestrians that there's bikes in that space. So getting the bike on the other side of the guardrail could be one of the impacts of this if it's a 3-lane system, and that would really accommodate that.
So that lane configuration on the bridge is part of the discussion.
Yep.
Right. Okay, good. Just wanted to clarify that. So, all right, this is a great topic. There's so many moving parts, and I appreciate your time. We appreciate the staff's time, and thank you for the question, too. Good stuff. Go ahead, Carl.
Are grants kind of connected with economic development improvement? Like you said, South Street got that grant really well.
So,
yeah, does that's a good question. Is that a piece of the selling points here?
All these grants have different criteria, but the South Avenue grant was a safety grant, and that was a program called Safe Streets for All. Downtown, the RAISE grant is really that's really got an economic component. It's also got this administration the grant is rebuilding something in infrastructure, but with sustainability and equity, or the S and the E.
Yeah.
So this has kind of a sustainability component and an economical access component. Economic development's always part of it, and so it kind of depends on the specific grant, but absolutely economic development is important. What the city is funded almost exclusively through property taxes, and so the city is very interested in doing things that protect tax base and expand tax base. That's why you see so much investment in in things that support private investment. And so this grant is no exception, where it's
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. In-house employment.
Yeah.
To bring in the money.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the interesting thing, and we'll be watching too. I'm sure some information will come out. So if people are watching or following this issue, we encourage you to keep an ear open, because there will be, like you said, some different planning things and opportunities and discussions that go forward. I know, like you mentioned, bear tracks. That certainly was a big part of that situation. So if you're really interested in this, good opportunity to get involved and help with final design and make our best case to see if we can get the money. So good enough. Mayor, we always appreciate your time very much. Thank you for your candor. Thanks for answering the questions. Thanks again to Jeremy and Aaron and Ellen. Everybody was here in a support role tonight, and we appreciate that. And just encourage everybody to get up to speed on this. It's an interesting opportunity. It's one that we should definitely pay attention to now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Okay.
Dennis.
Thank you
Come
very
back
much.
next month.
Yeah, we'll be back next month. Want to thank again our crew from MCAT here is helping us out tonight, and of course our host here at the Missoula Public Library. Thanks for joining us for Wednesdays with the Mayor.